I hope you're doing well. We had been going through the book of Numbers, and now I want to take you through some verses in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is the final book of what is called the Pentateuch, the five books of Moses. And in some ways, it's kind of a recap. As they prepare to go into the land. In chapter number 3, they have a battle outside of, on the other side of the Jordan River before they enter in, and they have victory. And then Moses is reminded that he is not going to be able to lead the people in, but he's given charge to encourage Joshua, who has been his servant from the very beginning, to lead the people in. In chapter number 4, Moses commands the people to be obedient. And this was the great struggle from the very beginning, because every time the people heard from the Lord, they said, whatever he says, we will do. And then they would rebel. So this is the weakness of the law. The law can command obedience, and it does, but it can't empower obedience. And so the great distinction between the old covenant and the new covenant is the old can command but not empower. The new covenant is empowered by the very indwelling life of Jesus Christ. We don't obey in order to be received. We are received and we are empowered to obey by his divine life. Now, in chapter 4, verse 9, I thought there was some interesting instructions that Moses gives. He says, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children. So if you remember back, because of the people's persistent disobedience, complaining and rebellion, the Lord had said that none of the people who were of the census of 20 and over when they came out of Egypt were going to enter into the land. They had cried and complained and said, well, we're just worried about our children going in there, that they will be prey. And God says, okay, all of you will die in this land, and your children that you were worried about, they will go in and conquer. But as Moses prepares to hand off the reins of leadership to Joshua, he says, you take care and you keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart. He's saying, don't forget the mighty acts of God that you have seen, and trust them. He says, don't let your eyes forget, or your heart, or cause your heart to depart. So you see, there's an intentional place where we, even as new covenant believers, that we make sure that we have renewed our minds in the truth. And the truth isn't a what, but the truth is a who. He says, don't be conformed to this world, Paul does in Romans 12, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may know what is that good and perfect will of God. Do you realize, friends, that even as a child born of God, and dwelt by his Spirit, his own life in you, if you aren't intentional about allowing your mind to be renewed, that your mind, your heart, your eyes can be easily distracted. It is the very reason that John tells us, don't love the world or the things of the world. Paul says, don't lay up treasures here on earth where they can be corrupted and rust and fade away, but lay up treasures in heaven. He reminds us over and over throughout the epistles that we have to remember the truth, or we will be easily distracted. And then he tells us, and make sure that these things are known to your children and your children's children. As a grandparent of 6, one of my great concerns is not that my, kids would forget, but that they would be distracted by the world, certainly. I've trained them. My children grew up on the mission field, involved in ministry, but I'm still concerned that they will be distracted by things of the world and materialism and the corruption that exists in the West. But I'm very concerned about my grandchildren. And so I take it as a personal responsibility to make it known to my children and my children's children the things that I have seen God do, the things I know about him who is true. This is one of the great joys of being a parent and a grandparent, that we have this responsibility to remind them, to encourage them, to stir up their hearts, to know the love that God has for them. You see, then he goes on, how on the day that you stood before the Lord and your God at Horeb, the Lord said to me, gather the people to me that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children so. So he takes them back to the very point where he receives God's law and all of the instructions. And he says, now teach your children. Teach them to remember. Teach them to learn to fear the Lord. I think that when we think of fear of the Lord, I don't want my children or my grandchildren to be afraid of God as though God were out to get them or destroy them, because that's the enemy's role. He is the one who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But I do want to encourage my children and my grandchildren to remember the fear of the Lord, the reverent regard for who he is in his holiness and in his justice, to remind them that they aren't God and God is not their servant, because that seems to be the message, the false preaching of our modern time, that God is our servant to do our will, and then when he doesn't do what we want, then we're angry at him. But we've gotten it all backwards. Even Paul says, listen, I'm free from all men, but I have made myself servant of all, that I might win all. We have a reverent regard for the awe of his holiness and his lordship. It is an awe to think that we have been made the dwelling place of God, that we have been partakers of the divine nature, that everywhere we go, he goes with us. Every word we speak, he hears. Paul even warned them in Corinth. He says, don't you know what's happening here? If you go into a prostitute, you take Christ into a prostitute. Friends, that's a fearful thing, to dishonor God. And so we teach them to have a reverent awe of what it is to be his temple. So I want to encourage you today, take care. Take care to keep your soul diligently connected, staying in step with the Holy Spirit, renewing your mind, thinking on the things that are good, true, pure, and right. Teaching your children how God has manifested himself so real in your life and your children's children. This is your great privilege, that they too may learn to live in a reverent awe of the Holy One, the Lord of Lords, and the King of Kings, in whom we are his children and his beloved. And yet he is still the one who rules and reigns over all. I'm praying that you will have this great pleasure with your children and your children's children as I do mine. Have a great day.